She thought he was her captor. The mafia boss was actually the one keeping her alive. The rain in Brookhaven did not wash the city clean. It only seemed to make the grime slicker, coating the streets in a reflective sheen of oil and neon. Inside the Emberline Lounge, the air was thick with the scent of expensive scotch, citrus peel, and the underlying, stale odor of secrets kept in low light. Lila Carter wiped down the mahogany bar top, her movements rhythmic and practiced. It was 2 a.m. The heavy bass of the lounge music had finally faded, replaced by the hum of the industrial refrigerator and the clinking of glass as the barbacks began the nightly cleanup. Her shoulders ached. She'd been on her feet for 10 hours, and before that, she had spent 4 hours staring at a computer screen in her cramped apartment, trying to finish a freelance logo design for a client who refused to pay a deposit. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and checked her watch. She needed to leave. The walk to the subway was only 5 blocks, but lately, 5 blocks felt like a gauntlet. It was the car, a gray sedan, nondescript, with tinted windows. She had seen it parked across from her apartment building 3 times this week, yesterday. She thought she saw it idling near the alley behind the bar. Paranoia, she told herself, wringing out the rag with more force than necessary, just leftovers from Owen. It had been 18 months since she had packed 2 suitcases and fled across state lines, but the phantom weight of her ex-boyfriend's control still sat on her chest. Owen liked to watch. He liked to know where she was, who she was speaking to, and exactly how long it took her to get home. Even now, with a restraining order that was barely worth the paper it was printed on and 300 miles between them, Lila kept her world small. She worked. She went home. She locked the deadbolt. Lila, she jumped, spinning around. Marcus, the floor manager, stood behind her, usually. Marcus was composed, a man who prided himself on the exclusivity of the Emberline. Tonight, he looked frayed, his tie was loosened, and a sheen of sweat coated his upper lip. "I need a favor," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The private event in the VIP room. They need another round of service, and half the wait staff has already clocked out. I need you to run a few bottles back there. I will pay you double for the hour." Lila hesitated. The VIP section was separated from the main lounge by heavy velvet curtains and a security guard. All night, men in sharp suits had been filtering in and out. Not the usual Wall Street types or tech moguls who frequented the Emberline. These men moved differently. They took up space with a quiet, predatory heavy-handedness. "I really need to get home, Marcus," Lila said, clutching her rag. "The trains stop running frequently after 3. "Please," Marcus pressed, glancing over his shoulder toward the darkened corridor. "Just drop the bottles and go. 10 minutes. I will cover your cab fare home." The offer of cab fare broke her resolve. It meant she wouldn't have to walk in the rain, wouldn't have to look over her shoulder for gray sedans. "Fine," she sighed. 10 minutes. She loaded a tray with 3 bottles of high-end bourbon and a bucket of ice. The weight was familiar in her hands, grounding her. She navigated the dimly lit floor, nodding to the security guard who stepped aside to let her pass. The back room was thick with cigar smoke. It was quieter here, the soundproofing swallowing the noise of the city outside. 5 men sat around a low marble table. They were not laughing. They were not drinking. They were leaning in, their focus entirely on a man sitting in the center of the plush leather sofa. Lila kept her eyes down, a survival instinct she had honed to perfection. Invisibility was safety. She moved to the side table, setting down the tray with delicate care to avoid making a sound. "The route is compromised," one man said. His voice was gravel, accented. "If we move the shipment through the harbor, the feds will be waiting." "Then we do not use the harbor," another voice replied. This one was smooth, baritone, and terrifyingly calm. "We burn the manifest. We cut the loss. I will not have my men walk into a trap for the sake of a few crates of merchandise." Lila froze. Her hand hovered over the ice bucket. She knew that voice. She didn't know the face, but the authority in the tone was absolute. "And the leak?" the first man asked. "Handled," the smooth voice said. Out of the corner of her eye, Lila saw a heavy manila envelope slide across the table. It was thick. It hit the marble with a dull thud. "Don't look," she screamed internally. "Just pour the drinks and leave." She turned to leave, clutching the empty tray against her chest like a shield. "Wait," the smooth voice commanded. Lila stopped. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She turned slowly. The man in the center was looking at her. He was younger than the others, perhaps in his early 30s, with hair as black as the ink on a summons and eyes that were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. He wore a suit that likely cost more than her entire year's rent. A faint, jagged scar ran along the line of his jaw, disappearing into his collar. "Leave the bottle," he said. "Take the ice." It was a dismissal. Lila nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She set the bourbon on the table and retreated, her legs trembling until she was back in the main corridor. She didn't stop at the bar. She went straight through the kitchen to the loading dock alley to dump the trash from the event, desperate for fresh air. The kitchen staff had already left. The service corridors were empty. She shoved the heavy metal door open with her hip, dragging a crate of empty glass bottles with her. The alley was dark, illuminated only by a single flickering security light and the distant glow of the street lamps at the end of the block. Rain poured down, drumming against the metal dumpsters. Lila hefted the crate, preparing to toss it into the recycling bin, when a movement in the shadows caught her eye. She froze. 20 feet away, near the mouth of the alley where the delivery trucks idled, 2 men were standing. No, 3. One man was on his knees in the mud. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. He was sobbing, but the sound was muffled, likely by a gag. Standing over him was a massive figure holding an umbrella, shielding the third man. The third man was the one from the VIP room, the one with the smooth voice. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, as if he were waiting for a bus rather than overseeing an execution. He looked down at the kneeling man with an expression of mild disappointment. "I gave you a chance, Freddie," the man said. His voice carried clearly over the sound of the rain. "I told you what would happen if you sold to Kovac." The kneeling man shook his head violently, pleading through the gag. The man in the suit sighed. He pulled a hand from his pocket. In it was a gun, matte black and fitted with a suppressor. He didn't hesitate. He didn't speechify. He simply raised the weapon, pressed the barrel against the kneeling man's forehead, and squeezed the trigger. Foot! The sound was sickeningly quiet, like a cork being pulled from a bottle. The man on the ground collapsed sideways into a puddle, his body going limp instantly. Lila gasped. It was an involuntary, sharp intake of breath that tore through her throat. Her hands spasmed. The crate of empty bottles slipped from her wet fingers. Crash! The sound of shattering glass exploded in the narrow alley, echoing off the brick walls like a gunshot. The man in the suit turned. His movement was fluid, precise. He didn't jump. He didn't look startled. He simply rotated his head and locked eyes with her, across the 20 feet of rain-slicked pavement. Lila stared into the face of a killer. Dante Moretti. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew his eyes. They were cold, calculating, and instantly aware. He looked at the dead body, then back at her, assessing the situation in a microsecond. Terror, primal and electric, seized her. "Grab her," he said. His voice was not raised, but the order cut through the storm. Lila dropped the tray and ran. She scrambled back toward the metal door, her boots slipping on the wet concrete. She slammed her shoulder into the bar, but the door had latched behind her, locked. "No, no, no," she whimpered, fumbling for her key card. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the card into the mud, behind her. She heard heavy footsteps splashing through the puddles. They were coming. She abandoned the door and bolted for the street. If she could make it to the main road, there would be people, witnesses, cameras. She dug into her apron pocket for her phone, her fingers slick with rain. She brought the screen up, swiping frantically to get to the emergency dialer. 911. Tires screeched. A massive black SUV roared into the mouth of the alley, blocking her path. The headlights blinded her, washing out her vision in a wall of white light. Lila skidded to a halt, turning to run back the way she came. but a hand clamped onto her arm like a vice. "Let go of me!" she screamed, thrashing wildly. A man in a dark suit had her. He was huge, his grip bruising. Lila kicked out, her boot connecting with his shin, but he didn't even flinch. Another pair of hands grabbed her other arm, pinning her. "Please!" she shrieked, the rain mixing with the tears that were now streaming down her face. "I didn't see anything, I swear. Help! Somebody help me!" A gloved hand clamped over her mouth, silencing her screams into muffled cries. They dragged her toward the SUV. The rear door flew open. She was shoved inside. Tumbling onto the leather seats, the door slammed shut, the lock engaging with a heavy mechanical thud that sounded like the end of her life. Lila scrambled upright, pressing her back against the far door, her chest heaving. Sitting next to her, brushing raindrops from the sleeve of his impeccable suit jacket, was the killer. Up close. Dante Moretti was terrifyingly handsome in a way that felt like a weapon. The scar on his jaw was jagged, a disruption in an otherwise perfect mask of composure. He smelled of expensive cologne and gunpowder. He looked at her not with lust or anger, but with a profound sense of irritation. "You," he said, his voice low, "have terrible timing." "I will scream," Lila stammered, her voice shaking violently. "I will tell the police. I have a phone." She reached for her pocket, but it was empty. The men outside must have taken it during the struggle. "You won't be talking to the police," Dante said calmly. He tapped the partition glass, and the driver accelerated, the SUV merging smoothly into the nighttime traffic of Brookhaven. "Please," she begged, her bravado crumbling into pure fear. "I'm nobody. I'm just a bartender. I won't say a word. Just let me out. I promise. I will forget I ever saw you." Dante turned to face her fully. His eyes swept over her, taking in the cheap uniform, the soaked hair, the raw terror in her posture. He seemed to be calculating her value, weighing her existence against the problem she had just created. "If I let you out of this car, Miss Carter," he said, and the use of her name made her blood run cold, "you would be dead within the hour, and not by my hand." "You killed him!" she accused, pressing herself harder against the door as if she could melt through it. "I saw you. You executed him. I cleaned up a mess," Dante corrected, his tone flat. "And now, unfortunately, you have stepped right into the middle of a much larger one. You have no idea what you just walked into." "Where are you taking me?" she whispered. Dante looked forward, watching the rain smear against the windshield. "Somewhere you cannot be found." The drive was a blur of neon lights and terror. Lila watched the familiar streets of Brookhaven pass by. Neighborhoods she knew, fading into the sleek, high-rise district of the city center. The SUV turned into the underground garage of a massive glass tower that pierced the skyline. They parked in a private bay. The doors opened, and the guards were there again, flanking her. Lila didn't fight this time. Her limbs felt heavy, useless. Shock was setting in. They escorted her into a private elevator that required a retinal scan to operate. The sensation of rising was rapid, her ears popping as they ascended dozens of stories. When the doors slid open, Lila gasped. She had expected a dungeon, a basement, a cell. Instead, she stepped into a penthouse that spanned the entire top floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the rain-swept city below. The floors were polished marble, the furniture modern and stark. It was beautiful, cold, and unmistakably a fortress. Lila saw security cameras blinking in the corners of the ceiling. 2 men stood guard by the heavy steel front doors, their hands clasped in front of them, stone-faced. "Welcome home," Dante said dryly, tossing his jacket onto a chair. "I can't be here," Lila said, her voice rising toward hysteria again. "People will look for me. My job, my landlord." "Your job has been informed you had a family emergency," Dante said, walking toward a wet bar to pour himself a drink. "Your landlord will be paid through the end of the year. As for people looking for you, let us hope they do not." He gestured to a hallway. "Take her to the guest suite. Check her for wires. Lock the door." "No," Lila shouted as a guard, a man Dante called Luca, stepped forward. "You can't do this. This is kidnapping. You're a monster." I'm a businessman, Lila, Dante said, taking a sip of his drink. He didn't look at her. And right now, you are a liability that I am trying very hard not to liquidate. Go to the room. Luca took her arm, firmly but not roughly, and guided her down the hall. Lila dug her heels in, but it was useless against his strength. She was shoved into a room that was larger than her entire apartment. Phone? Luca demanded. I told you, I don't... Check her. Dante's voice drifted down the hall. A female guard appeared from a side room, quickly patting Lila down, checking her pockets, her boots, her waistband. She found nothing. She is clean, the woman said. Leave her, Dante ordered. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked, a heavy electronic deadbolt sliding into place. Lila threw herself at the door, pounding on the solid wood with her fists. Let me out! Help! Please! She screamed until her throat was raw. She kicked the door until her toes bruised. Silence was the only answer from the other side. Slumping to the floor, she pressed her ear against the wood, trying to hear anything. Voices drifted from the main living area. They were low, but the acoustics of the hallway carried the sound. Tighten the perimeter, she heard Dante say. His voice was no longer smooth. It was hard, edged with steel. Nobody comes in or out without my direct authorization. If Kovac hears the witness is loose, he will move fast. He will burn this whole city down to get to her. And the girl? Luca asked. Keep her contained, Dante replied. She stays alive, for now. Lila pulled away from the door, a sob choking her. She stays alive, for now. She crawled toward the bed, curling up in the center of the mattress. The sheets were silk, cool against her skin, but they felt like a shroud through the massive window. The lights of Brookhaven twinkled below, thousands of people living their lives. Safe, free, she was trapped. Lila wrapped her arms around her knees, burying her face in the fabric of her uniform. The smell of the bar was still on her, a reminder of the life she had just lost. Memories of Owen crashed over her, the locked doors, the taken phones, the insistence that it was all for her own good. She had spent 2 years escaping one monster, only to be snatched up by another who was infinitely more powerful. She squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out to stain the expensive silk. She was alone in a glass tower, and the man holding the key was the devil himself. Morning light did not break gently into the penthouse. It assaulted the room, the floor-to-ceiling windows, which had offered a view of a glittering city the night before. Now exposed the gray, brutalist sprawl of Brookhaven under a heavy sky. Lila woke with a gasp, her body rigid before her eyes even opened. The silence of the room was heavy, insulated by thick glass and expensive walls. She sat up, clutching the duvet to her chest, the memory of the execution in the alley playing on a loop in her mind, the gun, the sound, the cold, dark eyes of Dante Moretti. She was still in her work clothes, the fabric wrinkled and smelling faintly of stale beer and fear. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and froze. A silver tray sat on the low dresser near the door. Beside it lay a neat stack of clothing. Lila approached it slowly, as if it might explode. There was a pot of coffee, still steaming, a bowl of fresh fruit, and a croissant. Her stomach growled. A traitorous sound in the quiet room. She hadn't eaten since lunch the day before. She reached for a grape, then pulled her hand back sharply. Poison. It was a ridiculous thought, or perhaps it was the most rational thought she had ever had. Why keep a witness alive? Maybe he wanted it to look like a heart attack. Maybe he wanted her to go to sleep and never wake up. Lila paced the room, her boots thudding softly on the plush carpet. She checked the door. Locked. She checked the window. Sealed tight. She was a bird in a glass cage. 30 minutes passed. The smell of the coffee was agonizing. Finally, exhaustion and hunger won out over paranoia. If Dante Moretti wanted to kill her, he had a gun. He didn't need to lace a croissant with arsenic. She ate quickly, standing up, eyes fixed on the door. She changed into the clothes provided, soft black leggings and an oversized gray cashmere sweater. They fit surprisingly well. The comfort of the fabric made her feel vulnerable, as if by wearing his clothes, she was accepting his ownership. The lock clicked. Lila scrambled back against the wall, grabbing a heavy crystal vase from the nightstand. She held it like a club. The door swung open. Dante walked in, followed closely by the large guard from the night before, Luca. Dante looked different in the daylight. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows and dark trousers, but he looked tired. There were shadows beneath his eyes, and the scar on his jaw seemed more pronounced. He stopped when he saw the vase. A flicker of amusement, or perhaps annoyance, crossed his face. "Put it down, Lila," Dante said. His voice was calm, deep, and utterly lacking in threat. "Stay back," she warned, though her voice shook. "I will scream." "The walls are soundproof," Dante replied dryly, "and I have a headache. Please put the vase down before you break it. It is an antique." He pulled a chair from the desk and sat down, crossing his legs. Luca stood by the door, arms crossed, looking like a statue carved from granite. "We need to talk," Dante said. "I have nothing to say to you," Lila snapped, though she lowered the vase slightly. "I want to go home." "You witnessed a murder," Dante said. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't use euphemisms. "The man you saw die was named Freddie Kelso. He was one of my lieutenants. He was also a rat." Lila swallowed hard. "I don't care who he was. You killed him. I executed a traitor who was selling the locations of my safe houses to the Kovac cartel," Dante corrected. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Do you know who the Kovac family is, Lila?" She shook her head, pressing her back against the wall. "They are butchers," Dante said softly. "They deal in weapons, drugs, and women, especially women. They take them from the streets, from clubs, from their own homes. They use them until they break, and then they discard them." Lila felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Freddie gave them information," Dante continued, "and because you were there, because you saw my face and his death, Kovac will assume you know what Freddie knew, or worse. He will think you are important to me. That makes you leverage." "You are lying," Lila whispered, though the steady conviction in his voice was terrifying. "You are just trying to scare me so I won't go to the police." "If you go to the police," Dante said, "you will be dead before you finish filling out the report. Half the precinct is on Kovac's payroll. Why do you think I haven't been arrested yet?" He stood up, the movement sudden enough to make Lila flinch. He walked to the window, looking out at the city. "I despise their business," he said, his voice dropping, sounding almost to himself. "I do not touch trafficking. I do not allow it in my territory. But Kovac is encroaching. He wants this city. And now, thanks to your bad timing, you are a pawn on the board." He turned back to her, his expression hard again. "You stay here. You stay alive. That is the deal." "I didn't agree to a deal," Lila shouted. "You kidnapped me. I extracted you," Dante said. "Luca, watch the door." He walked out before she could throw the vase. By mid-afternoon, the walls felt like they were closing in. Lila had paced the length of the room 100 times. She needed air. She needed out. She pressed her ear to the door. Silence. She knocked softly. "Hello?" The door opened. It wasn't Luca. It was a younger man, maybe 22, with a nervous energy and a suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders. I need some water," Lila said, pitching her voice to be soft. "Harmless?" She leaned against the doorframe, trying to look faint. "Please, I feel dizzy." The guard hesitated. "There is water in the bathroom. It tastes like rust." She lied. "Please, just a bottle from the kitchen?" He looked down the hall, then back at her. He was young. He wasn't hardened like Luca. "Fine, stay right there." He turned and walked toward the kitchen area. Lila waited 2 seconds, then she bolted. She took off her boots to run silently in her socks. She sprinted down the hallway in the opposite direction, toward the elevators. She mashed the call button, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Come on, come on. The numbers above the elevator didn't move. It was locked down. "Hey!" The shout came from behind her. The young guard was running back, water bottle in hand. Lila abandoned the elevator and lunged for the heavy door marked stairs. She shoved the bar. It opened with a shriek of metal, But the moment the seal broke, a deafening alarm blared through the penthouse. Whoop, whoop, whoop! She threw herself into the stairwell, grabbing the railing, ready to jump down the flights of stairs 3 at a time. A heavy hand clamped onto the back of her sweater. She was yanked backward with enough force to lift her feet off the ground. She screamed, thrashing, clawing at the arm that held her. It was another guard, one she hadn't seen, who had been stationed in the stairwell. "Let me go!" she shrieked. The door to the penthouse flew open. Dante was there. He looked murderous. He had shed his jacket, his tie was gone, and his eyes were blazing with a fury that made her knees buckle. "Bring her!" he snarled. The guard hauled her back into the hallway. Lila fought, kicking and spitting, panic overriding all sense. "You are not keeping me here," she screamed. "I am not your prisoner." Dante grabbed her arm, dismissing the guard with a sharp jerk of his head. He didn't drag her, but his grip was iron. He marched her down the hall, past the guest room, and into a large office at the end of the corridor. He slammed the door shut and released her. Lila stumbled back, catching herself on a leather armchair. "Are you insane?" Dante shouted. The calm, cold businessman was gone. In his place was a man vibrating with adrenaline. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You triggered the silent alarm to the lobby. You compromised the entire security grid." "Good," Lila shouted back, her chest heaving. "Maybe the police will come." "The police are not coming, Lila. But if you run out that door, Kovac's men will find you in 10 minutes. Do you want to die? Is that it? I would rather take my chances out there than stay in here with a psychopath like you." The word hit him like a physical blow. Dante stepped closer, crowding her space. "A psychopath? You kill people!" she yelled, backing up until her hips hit the heavy mahogany desk. "You kidnap women. You're exactly the same as them." "If I were the same as them," Dante said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, leaning down until they were nose to nose, "you would already be stripped, bound and sold to the highest bidder. If I wanted you dead, I would have left you in that alley." "Then let me go," she breathed, tears of frustration hot in her eyes. "No." Lila tried to shove past him. She placed her hands on his chest and pushed with all her strength. It was like pushing against a wall. He caught her wrists. It wasn't a strike. It wasn't an attack. His hands engulfed hers. Halting her movement instantly, he held her there, pinned between his body and the desk, his grip firm but careful. He didn't squeeze. He just stopped her. "Let go!" she gasped, struggling. "Stop fighting!" he ordered. "Let go! Lila, stop!" He gave her wrists a sharp, controlling tug, forcing her to stand still. Their bodies were inches apart. She could feel the heat radiating off him. She looked up, ready to spit in his face, ready to fight for her life. "Look at me," he commanded. She froze. She looked. She expected to see the cold, dead eyes of the killer from the alley. Instead, she saw chaos. His pupils were blown wide. His chest was heaving, mirroring hers. In the dark depths of his gaze, there wasn't cruelty. There was frustration. Yes. Anger, yes. But beneath it was a desperate, pained protectiveness. He looked like a man who was trying to hold back a landslide with his bare hands. "I am not going to hurt you," he said, the words rough, ground out from somewhere deep in his chest. "I am the only thing standing between you and a grave. Do you understand that?" Lila stopped struggling. Her breathing hitched. The adrenaline that had been fueling her fight began to curdle into something else, a sharp, electric awareness of his proximity. His thumbs brushed the delicate skin of her inner wrists, a subconscious, soothing motion that she didn't think he even realized he was doing. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. He was too close. She could smell the soap on his skin, the coffee on his breath. She could feel the rapid beat of his heart where her hands were still pressed against his chest, trapped under his own. For a second, his gaze dropped to her mouth, then snapped back up to her eyes. The air between them crackled, heavy and confused. Lila realized she wasn't afraid anymore. She was overwhelmed. She jerked her hands back. Dante released her instantly, stepping back 2 paces as if he had been burned. He ran a hand through his hair, turning his back to her. His shoulders were tense, the muscles visible through his white shirt. "Luca!" he bellowed. The door opened instantly. Yes, boss. She has the run of the penthouse, Dante said, not looking at Lila. Living room, kitchen, balcony, but she does not touch the elevators. She does not touch the stairs. If she gets within 5 feet of an exit, you restrain her. Understood? Understood. Dante walked to the sidebar and poured himself a drink, his hand shaking slightly. Get out of my office. Lila? The next 24 hours were a strange, blurred lesson in cognitive dissonance. Lila did not go back to the bedroom. She staked her claim in the living room, curling up on the massive sofa with a sketchbook she had requested and received. She watched. She watched Dante work. He didn't hide from her anymore. He sat at the dining table, surrounded by phones and laptops, conducting the business of an empire. I told you, Dante said into a phone, his voice cold. No, shut it down. I don't care if the shipment is already at the dock. If there are girls in those containers, you turn the ship around or I sink it myself. Lila paused her sketching, her pencil hovering over the paper. Later, a man in a cheap suit came in, looking terrified. He handed Dante a ledger. The clinic on 4th Street, Dante said, thumping a finger on the paper. They are threatening to close due to overhead. Pay their rent for the year. Put it under the shell company. And tell Dr. Evans that if he asks where it came from, the funding stops. Lila watched him rub his temples, looking exhausted. He was a criminal. He was a killer. But he was paying for a clinic in the poorest part of Brookhaven, and he was sinking ships to stop trafficking. Boss, Luca said later that evening, stepping into the room, we got word on Kovac's new route. They are moving the transport through the rail yard tonight. Lila saw Dante's hand tighten around his whiskey glass until his knuckles turned white. The kids? Dante asked quietly. Yes, Luca said. Teenagers? Runaways? Dante didn't yell. He didn't throw the glass. He set it down with terrifying precision. He stared at the wall, his jaw working, a silent, volcanic rage radiating off him. Burn the trucks, Dante said softly. Get the kids out. Give them cash. Put them on buses to the Midwest, then burn everything Kovac owns in that yard. Lila looked down at her sketchbook. She had started drawing a face without realizing it. It was him. Sharp angles, dark eyes, and a complexity she hadn't expected. By the second evening, the silence in the penthouse had shifted. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavy with unspoken things. Dante had dismissed the staff for the night. The penthouse was quiet. Lila, restless and needing something to do with her hands, had raided the kitchen. It was stocked with gourmet ingredients but looked like no one had ever cooked a real meal in it. She found pasta, garlic, tomatoes, and fresh basil. The simple act of chopping vegetables centered her. Dante walked in around 8 o'clock. He had shed the tie and the shoes. He padded into the kitchen in his socks, looking like a man who carried the weight of the world on his back. He stopped when he saw her at the stove. The smell of garlic and simmering tomatoes filled the air, warring with the usual scent of emptiness. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Cooking," Lila said, not turning around. "Unless you prefer I starve. I assume the catered trays are getting expensive." "I can afford the trays," he said, walking to the fridge to get a bottle of water. He leaned against the counter, watching her. "You don't look like the type who eats real food," Lila muttered, stirring the sauce. "I figured you subsisted on whiskey and fear." A huff of air escaped him. It might have been a laugh. "I used to cook," he said, "a long time ago. For my sister." Lila paused, the spoon stilling in the pan. She looked at him over her shoulder. "You have a sister?" "Yes," Dante said. His face softened, the lines of tension around his eyes smoothing out for a fraction of a second. "She is younger. I raised her after our parents died. I made sure she got out. She lives in Paris now. She thinks I run a logistics company." "Does she know?" Lila asked. "No," Dante said, "and she never will." He took a drink of water, his throat working. It was such a human moment. The big brother protecting the innocent sibling that Lila forgot for a second who he was. She turned back to the counter to chop some parsley, distracted, her mind spinning with this new piece of the puzzle. Her knife slipped. "Ah!" she hissed. dropping the knife. A bright line of red welled up across the fleshy part of her palm. "Lila!" Dante was there before the knife even hit the floor. He moved with that terrifying speed, but this time, it wasn't directed at an enemy. He grabbed her hand, pulling it over the sink. "Let me see." "It's fine," she stammered, heart racing. "It's just a scratch." "It is deep," he murmured. He turned on the faucet, running cool water over the cut. His hands were huge, rough-skinned and calloused, engulfing her small, pale hand, but his touch was agonizingly gentle. He washed the blood away with a care that made her breath catch in her throat. He reached for the first aid kit that sat on the counter. He evidently kept it close, and pulled out antiseptic and gauze. Lila watched him. His head was bent over her hand, his dark hair falling forward. He patted the cut dry, his movements precise. "This will sting," he warned softly. He applied the antiseptic. Lila hissed, instinctively trying to pull back, but he held her steady. He wrapped the gauze around her palm, securing it with tape. When he was done, he didn't let go. He held her hand in his thumb tracing the line of her wrist, right over her pulse point. Lila's heart was thudding against her skin, and she knew he could feel it. She looked up. He was already looking at her. The kitchen was quiet, save for the bubbling of the sauce on the stove. The city lights cast a soft, ambient glow through the windows behind him, framing his silhouette. Dante's eyes were dark, searching. He looked at the bandage, then up at her lips, then back to her eyes. The heat from his body was encompassing. Lila felt a magnetic pull, a terrifying urge to lean forward, to close the 6 inches of space between them. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist again, a slow, deliberate caress that sent a shockwave through her entire body. "Dante?" she whispered. She didn't know why she said his name. The sound of it seemed to snap him out of a trance. His eyes widened slightly, and his jaw tightened. The mask slammed back into place. He dropped her hand abruptly. "Be more careful," he said, his voice rough, devoid of the warmth that had been there seconds ago. He turned on his heel and walked out of the kitchen, his shoulders set in a hard line, leaving Lila standing alone by the stove, clutching her bandaged hand against her chest, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The silence in the penthouse was a deception. It felt heavy, pressurized, like the air before a lightning strike. It was 3 a.m. Lila could not sleep. She sat on the edge of the sofa in the living room, staring at the embers of the gas fireplace, her hand still throbbing faintly beneath the gauze Dante had applied earlier. Dante was in his office. She could see the sliver of light beneath the door. He hadn't slept either. Then, the world exploded. It started with a sound that Lila's brain refused to process at first, a high-pitched whine followed by a shattering crash that sounded like the sky falling. The floor-to-ceiling glass doors leading to the balcony disintegrated, raining shards into the living room. "Get down!" The roar came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Before Lila could scream, a heavy weight slammed into her, knocking her off the sofa and onto the Persian rug behind the kitchen island. Dante was on top of her. He was a wall of solid muscle and heat, shielding her entire body with his own. Above them, the air was torn apart by the deafening crack of gunfire. Bullets chewed into the plaster of the walls and shattered the expensive vases on the mantel. Lila screamed, but the sound was lost in the chaos. She squeezed her eyes shut, her hands clutching the lapels of Dante's shirt. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't panicking. Against her. His heart beat with a terrifying, rhythmic hammer, but his movements were precise. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl near her ear. "Do not move." He rolled off her, keeping low, moving in a crouch that was fluid and practiced. He had a gun in his hand. She hadn't even seen him draw it. "Luca, status." Dante barked, firing 2 controlled shots toward the shattered balcony. "Breach at the east terrace," Luca's voice shouted back from the hallway, followed by the boom of a heavier weapon. "They are rappelling from the roof." Lila pressed her hands over her ears, curling into a ball on the cold marble floor. The smell of gunpowder and ozone filled the room, choking her. She watched through the gap between the cabinets as Dante moved. He was terrifyingly efficient. He didn't fire wildly. He waited, adjusted his angle, and fired. A shadow loomed in the broken doorway, a man in tactical gear. Dante dropped him with a single shot before the intruder could raise his rifle. "Clear the room," Dante shouted. More men, Dante's security team, poured into the living room, engaging the targets on the balcony. The noise was unbearable, a cacophony of shouting and explosions. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the shooting stopped. "Secure," Luca yelled. "Perimeter is secure." Dante stood up slowly, his weapon still raised, scanning the darkness of the terrace. He lowered the gun only when 3 of his men moved out to check the bodies. He turned immediately to the kitchen island. "Lila!" She was trembling so violently she couldn't stand. Dante holstered his weapon and reached down, gripping her arms. He hauled her to her feet, his eyes scanning her face, her body, checking for blood. "Are you hit?" he demanded. "No," she gasped, her teeth chattering. "No, I don't think so." "Good." He didn't let go of her arms. He held her steady, anchoring her while the room spun. "Boss," Luca said, stepping into the kitchen. He was clutching his left shoulder, blood seeping through his fingers. His face was pale, grim. "Rick is down. He didn't make it. They knew exactly where the shift change happened. They knew the blind spot in the cameras." Dante's face went cold, a mask of stone. "Inside information." "It has to be," Luca said. Dante pulled his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number, his eyes never leaving Lila's face. Though she knew he wasn't really seeing her right now, he was seeing the betrayal. "We are blown," Dante snarled into the phone. "The penthouse is compromised. Initiate protocol, 0. And find me the name. I want to know who sold the shift schedules to Kovac. I want to know who buried us." He hung up and looked at Lila. The intensity in his gaze made her breath hitch. "We are leaving," he said. "Now." "Leaving?" Lila stammered. "Where?" "To the police." Dante laughed, a short, bitter sound. "The police would hand you to Kovac before sunrise. We are going to ground." The reality crashed into her. The bullets, the shattered glass, the dead bodyguard. This wasn't just about Dante. They had come for her. Kovac had sent a hit squad into a fortress to kill her because of what she had seen. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was a target. Dante didn't give her time to process the horror. He guided her toward the service corridor, moving fast. "Do not stop," he ordered. "Do not look back." They took a private service elevator that Lila hadn't even known existed. It descended rapidly, bypassing the lobby and opening directly into a sub-basement garage. The air here was cool and smelled of concrete and gasoline. A nondescript sedan was waiting, engine idling. 2 of Dante's men were loading bags into the trunk. Dante opened the passenger door for her as she hesitated, looking around the dark garage with wide, fearful eyes. He placed his hand on the small of her back. It wasn't a shove. It wasn't the controlling grip Owen used to use to steer her in public. It was light, firm, and steadying. It said, "I am here. Move." Lila climbed in. They drove for 2 hours. The city lights of Brookhaven faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by the crushing darkness of the countryside. Rain began to fall again, lashing against the windshield in rhythmic sheets. Dante drove. He hadn't said a word since they left the garage. His eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror, checking for tails. The tension in the car was thick enough to choke on. Lila hugged her arms around herself. She was wearing a coat one of the guards had thrown at her, but she couldn't get warm. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man falling on the balcony. "Where are we going?" she asked finally, her voice small in the quiet car. "North," Dante said. "My uncle left me a property near the lake. It is off the grid. No digital footprint, no cameras. Is it safe?" Dante glanced at her. The dashboard lights cast shadows across the sharp angles of his face. "Safer than the penthouse. Nobody knows about it except Luca and me?" They turned off the main highway onto a gravel road that wound through dense woods. The trees crowded the path, their branches scraping the roof of the car like skeletal fingers. Finally, the headlights swept over a structure. It wasn't a fortress. It was a cabin, large, 2 stories of timber and stone, sitting near the edge of a black, churning lake. It looked weathered, settled into the earth as if it had grown there. Dante killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was deafening, broken only by the rain and the wind in the trees. Inside, Dante said. They made a dash for the porch. Inside. The air was musty and cold, smelling of pine and old wood smoke. Dante flipped a breaker switch near the door, and a few warm lamps flickered to life. The interior was rustic. Worn wooden floors, a stone fireplace that dominated the living room, heavy furniture covered in dust sheets. It was beautiful in a lonely, forgotten way. "Luca," Dante said as the big man entered behind them, followed by 2 other guards. "Sit down. Let me look at that shoulder." Lila watched from the doorway of the kitchen as Dante, the man who ordered executions and ran a criminal empire, rolled up his sleeves. He washed his hands in the small sink and then knelt beside Luca. "It went through." Luca grunted, wincing as he peeled back his jacket. "Clean exit." "You are lucky," Dante murmured. He worked with a first aid kit that looked like a trauma bag. He cleaned the wound, his touch careful. "Hold still, I have to stitch it." "Just do it, boss," Luca said through gritted teeth. As Dante worked, the other men moved around the room, securing windows and checking the perimeter. But the atmosphere was different here. In the penthouse, they were soldiers. Here, in the quiet of the woods, they were just tired men. "Remember when Uncle Sal fell off this roof trying to fix the antenna?" one guard joked quietly, checking a window latch. "He swore a bird attacked him," Luca rasped, chuckling despite the pain as Dante tied a knot in the suture. "Stubborn old mule," Dante's lips quirked, a barely there smile. "He was drunk on grappa. There was no bird." Lila stared. The hardness in Dante's face had softened. He taped the bandage over Luca's shoulder and patted the man's good arm. "Rest," Dante ordered. "Marco and I will take the first watch." He stood up and turned, catching Lila watching him. The softness vanished instantly, replaced by the mask. But she had seen it. She had seen the loyalty. These men didn't follow him just because they were paid or afraid. They followed him because he stitched them up himself. The storm worsened as evening turned into night. Thunder rolled across the lake, shaking the cabin's timber frame. Lila was in the hallway, looking for a bathroom. When the power died, the lamps flickered once, then plunged the house into absolute darkness. Lila froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Click. The sound of the breaker tripping was loud in the silence. "Just a blackout," a voice called out from the living room. "Lines are down." But Lila couldn't move. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a memory. It was Owen locking her in the basement when the power went out, telling her she hadn't earned the right to have a flashlight. It was the feeling of walls closing in, of invisible hands reaching for her. Her heart began to race. A frantic rabbit kick against her ribs. She backed up until her spine hit the wall, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor. Her knees pulled to her chest. She buried her face in her arms, trying to breathe, trying to stop the room from spinning. "Thunder," she whimpered, pressing her hands over her ears. "Lila?" The voice was low, near. She didn't look up. She couldn't. She heard the soft scuff of boots on the wood. Then a presence settled on the floor a few feet away from her. He didn't touch her. He didn't try to pull her hands away. He just sat there. "When I was 12, Dante's voice said, calm and steady in the dark. "My sister, Sophia, was terrified of storms. She would hide under the kitchen table." Lila's breath hitched. She listened to the cadence of his voice, anchoring herself to it. "I used to sit with her," Dante continued. "We would count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, to see how far away the lightning was." A flash of white light illuminated the hallway for a split second, revealing Dante sitting against the opposite wall, his legs stretched out, his hands resting loosely in his lap. He was looking at her, his expression unreadable but devoid of judgment. Boom. 1 mile, Dante said softly. Lila slowly lowered her hands. The darkness returned, but it felt less suffocating with him there. "My ex-boyfriend," Lila whispered, her voice trembling. "Owen, he used to lock me in the dark, to teach me lessons. If I burned dinner, if I smiled at the wrong person." Dante went very still. Even in the dark, she could sense the shift in him. The air around him seemed to tighten. He told me it was for my own good, Lila said, the words spilling out like water from a broken dam. He said the world was dangerous, and he was the only one who could protect me. So I had to stay inside. I had to stay small. She heard Dante's breath intake, sharp and controlled. I am not him, Dante said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. You kidnapped me, Lila countered weakly. I did, Dante admitted, and I hate that I did. But Lila, listen to me. He waited until she lifted her head. I will never lock you in a room to teach you a lesson, he said. The conviction in his tone was absolute. I will never lay a hand on you in anger. And when this is over, when Kovac is gone and you are safe, if you want to walk away, I will open the door for you myself. I will give you a new name, money, a plane ticket. You will never see me again. Lila stared at his silhouette. You would let me go? I'm not your jailer, Dante said. I'm just the man trying to keep you breathing. The honesty of it, the raw, painful truth, struck her. He wasn't trying to own her. He was risking his life, his men, his empire, just to keep her from becoming another statistic. Another crack of thunder shook the house. Lila flinched, a gasp escaping her lips. Without thinking, she reached out into the darkness. Her hand brushed his arm. Dante didn't pull away. He shifted, moving closer, until he was sitting right beside her. He took her hand. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, larger than hers. He engulfed her trembling fingers, his grip firm but not crushing. Just breathe, he murmured. They sat there for a long time. The storm raged outside, wind howling against the eaves. But in the hallway, it was quiet. The fireplace in the living room cast a faint, flickering orange glow that barely reached them, painting Dante's face in shadow and light. Lila turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. The contact was electric. It wasn't fearful. It was grounding. She felt his thumb stroke the back of her hand, a slow, rhythmic circle that matched the beat of her heart. She looked at him. He was watching her, his dark eyes intense, reflecting the distant firelight. The scar on his jaw looked silver in the gloom. Dante, she whispered. The air between them changed. It grew heavy, charged with a sudden, overwhelming awareness. The fear of the storm was replaced by a different kind of tension, the pull of two bodies in the dark. Lila leaned in. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was the way he had stitched Luca's shoulder. Maybe it was because he was the first man who had ever offered her freedom instead of a cage. She hesitated inches from him, searching his face. Dante went rigid. His breath hitched, a ragged sound in the quiet hallway. He could have pulled away. He could have told her to stop. Instead, he leaned forward. His hand came up, cupping her jaw. His fingers were incredibly gentle, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Their lips met. It was tentative at first, a question. Lila pressed closer, her heart hammering. Dante hesitated for one agonizing second, and then he broke. He groaned low in his throat and kissed her back. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate. It was the taste of pent-up fear and relief, and a hunger that had been simmering since the moment their eyes met in that alley. His mouth moved over hers with a searing intensity. Lila gasped, opening to him, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, pulling him closer. His other hand moved to her waist. He didn't grab her. He rested his hand there, heavy and warm, pulling her body against his but leaving her room to retreat. It was a respectful touch, a silent promise that he wouldn't take more than she gave. The kiss deepened, becoming a consuming thing. Lila felt the rough stubble of his jaw against her skin, the heat of his body seeping into hers. For a moment, there was no Kovac, no hit squad, no past, just him. Just this. They broke apart, gasping for air. Dante rested his forehead against hers. His breathing was harsh, ragged. His hand was still on her jaw, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "Lila," he whispered. His voice wrecked. The reality of what they had just done crashed down on her. She was the witness. He was the mob boss. This was impossible. This was dangerous. Lila pulled back slightly, her eyes wide. I don't know what this means." Dante closed his eyes for a moment, looking like a man in pain. He dropped his hand from her face. though his fingers lingered for a second before falling away. "It means we are alive," he said hoarsely, "and we are in trouble." He looked at her, his eyes black and bottomless. "We will figure this out, but not tonight. Tonight, you need to sleep. You are safe here." He stood up, offering her a hand to pull her to her feet, but he didn't pull her into his arms again. He stepped back, putting 2 feet of distance between them. "Take the bedroom upstairs," he said. "The sheets are clean. I will take the couch down here. I need to keep watch near the door anyway." "Dante," she started, reaching out. He shook his head. "Go, before I forget that I am supposed to be a gentleman." The look in his eyes was scorching, filled with a desire so potent it made her knees weak, but his jaw was set in a line of iron self-control. He was refusing to use her vulnerability against her. He was refusing to be Owen. Lila nodded, her throat tight. She turned and walked up the stairs, her body humming, her lips still tingling from his kiss. She paused at the top of the landing and looked down. Dante was standing in the dark hallway, watching her. He stood guard like a sentinel, a dark shadow against the flickering firelight, protecting her from the world and from himself. The morning sun that filtered through the pines surrounding the lake house offered no warmth. It was a pale, sickly light that did little to chase away the damp chill settling into the bones of the old cabin. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and impending violence. Lila Carter sat on the edge of the worn sofa, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Her eyes were fixed on the closed door of the kitchen, where Dante and Luca had been sequestered for the last hour. The intimacy of the night before, the storm, the hallway, the kiss that had shattered her defenses, felt like a fever dream. In the cold light of day, the reality of her situation had returned with jagged teeth. She was not a guest. She was a liability. The kitchen door creaked open, but only a fraction. Voices drifted out, low and urgent. Lila stood up, intending to ask for more coffee, but the tone of Dante's voice stopped her in her tracks. It wasn't the soft, rumbling baritone he had used in the dark hallway. It was the cold, surgical voice of the man who had executed a traitor in a rain-slicked alley. "The burner phone from the shooter confirms it," Dante was saying. "We have a mole. Luca. Someone inside the inner circle. They were texting coordinates. They know about the lake house. We need to move," Luca replied, his voice strained. "Moving is a risk," Dante countered. "If they know we are here, they are likely already watching the roads. We are boxed in." There was a heavy pause, the sound of a fist hitting a wooden table. "We have one option," Dante said, his voice dropping lower, lethal in its pragmatism. "We contact Kovac. We set up a meet. We tell him we are willing to hand over the girl." Lila froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her lightheaded. The mug slipped from her fingers, landing on the thick rug with a dull thud that went unnoticed by the men in the kitchen. "You want to give her up?" Luca asked, sounding shocked. "It is the only way to draw them out into the open," Dante said. "We set the exchange for noon at the old quarry. We give them Lila, and while they are securing her—" Lila didn't hear the rest. She didn't hear him say, "We position snipers on the ridge," or "We hit them before they even touch her." The static rushing in her ears drowned out everything except the sentence that had just severed the fragile thread of trust she had begun to weave. "We give them Lila." She backed away from the door, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was using her. Last night, the kindness, the touch, the look in his eyes, it was all a manipulation. He was a mob boss, and she was a bargaining chip. He had told her she was leverage, and now he was spending her. She turned and ran toward the back of the cabin. She needed to get out. She shoved through the back door, stumbling out onto the rotting wood of the deck. The lake stretched out before her, gray and forbidding. A small dock jutted out into the water, and tied to it was a small aluminum fishing boat. If she could get to the boat, maybe she could cross the lake. Maybe there was a town on the other side, a police station, anywhere that wasn't here. Lila sprinted across the wet grass, her boots slipping on the mud. "Hey!" The shout came from the side of the house. Marco. One of the guards was patrolling near the woodpile. He saw her running and immediately dropped his cigarette, sprinting to intercept her. "Miss Carter, stop!" "Get away from me!" Lila screamed, scrambling onto the dock. Marco was faster. He caught her just as she reached the wooden planks, grabbing her arm and spinning her around. "Let me go!" she shrieked, striking out at him. "He's going to sell me! Let me go!" "Lila!" Dante's voice thundered from the porch. Lila froze, panting, her chest heaving. She looked back to see Dante leaping off the deck, clearing the stairs in one bound. He stormed across the grass, his face a mask of thunderous fury. He reached them in seconds, grabbing Lila's other arm and pulling her away from Marco. "What do you think you are doing?" Dante roared, shaking her slightly. "Are you trying to get yourself killed? There are snipers in these woods." "You mean the ones you hired?" Lila yelled back, wrenching her arm free. She shoved him, her hands slamming against his chest. I heard you in the kitchen. You were going to trade me to Kovat." Dante stared at her, his eyes widening in shock, then narrowing in frustration. "You were eavesdropping? I was listening to the man who promised to keep me safe right before he planned to hand me over like a sack of cash." Tears burned her eyes, hot and angry. "I was stupid. I actually thought you were different. I thought last night meant something." "It did mean something," Dante snapped, stepping into her space, his voice rough. "And if you had listened for 5 more seconds, you would have heard the part where I blow Kovacs' men to hell before they get within 10 feet of you. It was a trap. Lila, a fake exchange. And what if it goes wrong?" she cried. "What if they take me? You are gambling with my life to save your empire." "I am gambling with my life to save yours," Dante roared back. The veins in his neck were prominent, pulsing with the force of his shout. "I am trying to keep 100 people alive, not just one. I have men with families. Lila, I have a responsibility to them, too. I cannot just run into the woods and hope for the best." "Then let me go," she screamed. "If I am such a burden, let me leave. You leave this property and you are dead." Dante grabbed her shoulders, holding her still. "Do you understand? Dead. They will not just kill you. Lila, they will break you first. I am the only thing standing between you and that nightmare." They stood chest to chest on the swaying dock, the gray water lapping at the pylons beneath them. The air crackled with the energy of their argument, a volatile mix of fear, anger, and the jagged edge of the attraction that still pulled at them. Dante's grip on her shoulders softened, his thumbs pressing into her coat. He looked down at her, his expression twisting with a raw, agonizing conflict. "I am not trading you," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I would burn this city to the ground before I let them touch you. You have to believe that." Lila searched his eyes. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him, but before she could answer, the world turned into chaos. "Boss incoming," Marco shouted, pointing toward the tree line. A screech of tires tore through the quiet woods. 3 heavy armored SUVs smashed through the underbrush, tearing up the gravel driveway. They swerved into the clearing, boxing in the cabin and the path to the dock. Men in tactical gear poured out of the vehicles, weapons raised. They didn't fire. They formed a perimeter, their movements precise and practiced. Dante shoved Lila behind him instantly, drawing his handgun, but he didn't fire. There were too many of them, at least 20. Red laser sights danced across Dante's chest and forehead. "Drop it, Moretti!" The voice boomed from a loudspeaker mounted on the lead SUV. Dante stood rigid, his body a shield in front of Lila. He didn't drop the gun. "We have the house surrounded," the voice continued. "We have the road. We have the woods. You have nowhere to go." Dante cursed under his breath, a vile string of Italian. "The mole," he hissed to himself. "They didn't just track us. They sent the location the second we arrived." "Send out the girl," the voice demanded. "Send out the girl, and maybe the boss lives. Maybe your men walk away." Lila peered around Dante's shoulder. She saw Luca and the other 2 guards on the porch, their weapons raised but useless against the wall of firepower facing them. If Dante fought, everyone died. Luca, Marco, the young guard who had brought her water. Dante seemed to realize it in the same second. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of his posture not from fear, but from calculation. "Dante," Lila whispered, grabbing the back of his coat. Don't—" He turned to her. His eyes were dark, filled with a terrifying resolve. "I cannot let them kill my men, Lila, and I cannot win this firefight." "No," she pleaded, shaking her head. "They will kill you." "Stay close to me," he ordered. "Do not say a word." He turned back to the SUVs. "I am coming out," he shouted, "but I come with her. That is the deal. You want the girl, you take me too." There was a pause. Then, the loudspeaker crackled. "Hands where we can see them." Dante holstered his gun. He raised his hands slowly. "Come," he murmured to Lila. They walked off the dock and onto the grass. The walk felt like a funeral procession. The mud sucked at Lila's boots. Every step was a battle against the instinct to run. As they reached the lead SUV, the door opened. A man stepped out. It wasn't Kovac. It was a lieutenant Lila recognized from the photos Dante had shown her. A man with a thick neck and a cruel, flat face. "Smart choice," the lieutenant sneered. He signaled to his men. 2 guards rushed forward. They didn't honor the deal. One guard grabbed Dante, slamming him face first into the hood of the second SUV. They zip-tied his hands behind his back with brutal efficiency. "No!" Lila screamed as another guard seized her, dragging her toward the third vehicle. "You said we go together," Dante struggled, kicking back at his captor. "We had a deal." "She stays with me." "Plans change," the lieutenant laughed. He shoved Dante into the back of the second SUV and slammed the door. Lila was thrown into the back seat of the third car. She scrambled to the window, pressing her hands against the glass. She saw Dante's vehicle peel away, tires spinning in the mud. "Dante!" she screamed. Though he couldn't hear her, her driver gunned the engine, and the convoy split up. Dante was gone. She was alone. The drive was an eternity of terror. Lila was blindfolded halfway through the trip, the darkness amplifying every turn, every bump in the road. She didn't know if they were going to kill her, torture her, or just make her disappear. When the car finally stopped, the air smelled of salt and rust. Rough hands hauled her out. The blindfold was ripped off. She was standing in a cavernous, abandoned warehouse. The high windows were painted black or broken, letting in slivers of gray light. Water dripped from the ceiling, echoing in the vast, empty space. But it wasn't empty. As the guards dragged her across the concrete floor, she saw them. To her left, makeshift cells had been constructed from chain-link fencing. Inside were women. Some were young, barely out of their teens. They sat on dirty mattresses, their eyes hollow, their spirits clearly broken. Lila felt a scream build in her throat, but it died there, choked off by pure horror. This was the business Dante refused to touch. This was what he had been protecting her from. "Move," the guard growled. Shoving her forward, she was taken to a central area, a cleared space illuminated by portable floodlights. A single wooden chair sat in the center. "Sit." Lila sat. Her legs wouldn't have held her up much longer anyway. They tied her wrists behind the chair, the rope biting into her skin. Footsteps echoed from the shadows, slow, deliberate. A man emerged into the pool of light. He was older than Dante, with silver hair and a suit that looked expensive, but sat wrong on his frame, as if it were trying to disguise a rot underneath. Victor Kovac. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were dead things, shark-like and void. "Miss Carter," Kovac said, his voice smooth and oily. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble for a graphic designer." "Where is Dante?" Lila demanded, surprising herself with the strength of her voice. "Mr. Moretti is currently being entertained by some of my associates across town," Kovac said dismissively. "He will join us shortly. I thought he might appreciate a front row seat to your dismantling." "I don't know anything," Lila said, tugging at her bonds. "I just saw a man die, that's all." Kovac chuckled. He circled her chair, trailing a finger along the back of her neck. Lila flinched, her skin crawling. "You think this is about the alley?" Kovac asked. "My dear, the alley was just bad luck." "You were a target long before you walked out that door." Lila stared at him, confused. "What?" "The freelance project," Kovac said. "The branding package for the logistics firm. Do you remember?" Lila blinked. That was months ago. It was just a logo and some data entry. It was a ledger, Kovac corrected. My ledger. The man who hired you was looking to embezzle from me. He hid the transaction logs inside the graphic files, encrypted in the metadata, and he uploaded them to a cloud drive registered to you. The room spun. The data project, the client who had disappeared without paying. She had been holding the evidence of a massive criminal conspiracy on her laptop for months, completely unaware. You have the keys to my kingdom. Lila, Kovac whispered, leaning close to her ear. And I want them back. And then I'm going to make sure no one ever finds them again. He motioned to one of his men, who stepped forward with a video camera. But first, Kovac said, straightening his tie, we need to send a message to the rest of the city, a demonstration of what happens when people get in my way. The cameraman checked the focus. Kovac pulled a knife from his belt. The blade gleamed under the harsh floodlights. Lila couldn't breathe. She stared at the knife, her mind going blank with terror. This was it. This was how she died. Boom. The sound was dull, muffled by the thick walls of the warehouse, but the ground shook. Kovac paused, looking toward the heavy steel doors at the far end of the bay. Crack, crack, crack. Gunfire. Distinct, rapid, and getting closer. What is that? Kovac snapped. A guard ran into the circle of light, looking panicked. Breach! The south gate is down! It's a raid! Police! Kovac demanded. No! The guard yelled over the sound of another explosion that blew the glass out of the high windows. It's a hit squad, heavy assault! Lila's heart leaped into her throat. Dante, kill her! Kovac shouted, pointing at Lila. Finish it, I will handle the door. Kovac ran toward the shadows. The cameraman dropped his equipment and fled. But one guard remained. He pulled his sidearm, turning toward Lila with grim determination. Lila struggled against the ropes, kicking out her legs. Help! Someone help! The guard raised the gun. The massive steel bay doors behind him exploded inward. It wasn't just opened, it was rammed. A heavy truck smashed through the metal, debris flying everywhere. The guard flinched, spinning around to fire at the vehicle. Gunshots erupted from the smoke. The guard jerked back, hit in the chest, and crumpled to the floor. Lila squeezed her eyes shut, screaming as the noise reached a crescendo. Lila! The voice cut through the chaos like a beacon. She opened her eyes. Dante was sprinting through the smoke. He looked like a demon rising from hell. His white shirt was torn and stained with blood. There was a nasty gash on his cheek, and he was moving with a limp, but the gun in his hand was steady, and the fury in his eyes was terrifying to behold. He vaulted over a pile of debris, shooting a second guard who tried to intercept him from the catwalks above. He didn't stop. He didn't look at the enemies. He only looked at her. He reached the chair, dropping to his knees. Dante, she sobbed, her body shaking uncontrollably. You came back. I told you, he rasped, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He pulled a knife, not to hurt her, but to slash the ropes binding her wrists. I told you I would burn this city down. The ropes gave way. Lila fell forward, and Dante caught her. He pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck for a split second. He smelled of smoke, blood, and sweat, but to Lila, it was the best smell in the world. He was solid. He was real. Are you hurt? He demanded, pulling back to check her. Did he touch you? No, she wept. No, you got here. You got here just in time. Alarms began to blare throughout the warehouse, a high-pitched wail that signaled the building was going into lockdown. Dante hauled her to her feet, gripping her hand so tight it hurt. He looked at the exit, then back at her. We're not done yet, he said, his voice hard as iron. We have to move. Run. The air inside the warehouse was no longer air. It was a choking suspension of concrete dust, smoke, and the acrid bite of gunpowder. The alarm screamed overhead, a rhythmic, mechanical wail that vibrated in Lila Carter's teeth as she ran. Dante Moretti had her hand in a crushing grip. He did not look back. He moved with the terrifying momentum of a man who had decided that the only way out was through. Keep your head down, Dante shouted over the roar of the fire suppression system that had just kicked in, spraying a mist of water that turned the dust into a slick, gray mud. They rounded a corner into a narrow service corridor. Ahead, 3 figures in tactical gear emerged from the shadows, weapons raised. Lila barely had time to gasp before Dante shoved her violently against the cinder block wall. He didn't dive for cover. He stepped in front of her, his body becoming a human shield, blocking her entire field of vision. The hallway erupted in noise. The sound of gunfire in an enclosed space was physical, a concussive force that slammed against the chest. Lila squeezed her eyes shut, curling into the wall, feeling the heat of Dante's back pressed against her front. She heard the distinct, wet thud of a bullet hitting flesh, followed by a sharp hiss of breath from Dante. He didn't fall. He returned fire, his arm steady despite the impact. 3 shots rang out, precise and final. The return fire stopped. "Move!" Dante commanded. His voice was tight, strained. He grabbed her arm again, hauling her forward past the fallen men. Lila glanced at him as they ran. His white shirt, already ruined by dirt and sweat, was now blossoming with a dark, terrifying stain high on his left bicep. "You are hit!" Lila cried, panic seizing her throat. She tried to slow down, reaching for his arm. "Dante, you are bleeding!" "Walk," he snarled, pushing her toward the exit doors. "It is a graze. Keep moving or we die here." They burst out of the side door into the cool night air. The sudden silence of the outside world was jarring. A gray cargo van screeched around the corner. Jumping the curb, the side door slid open, revealing Luca, his face pale and grim, holding an assault rifle. "Get in!" Luca yelled. Dante practically threw Lila into the back of the van before climbing in after her. He slammed the door shut, and the vehicle peeled away, tires smoking, just as a group of Kovach's men burst through the warehouse exit behind them. Lila scrambled across the metal floor of the van to where Dante had slumped against the wall. The adrenaline that had kept him upright was fading, replaced by the shock of the injury. Blood was soaking through his sleeve, dripping onto his hand. "We need to stop the bleeding," she said, her voice shaking but her hands moving with frantic purpose. She ripped the hem of her shirt, tearing a long strip of fabric. "I am fine," Dante gritted out, though his face was gray. He looked at Luca in the driver's seat. "Get us to the auto shop, the one in the Moody district." "Go." "On it, boss," Luca said. His eyes flicking to the rearview mirror, Lila pressed the makeshift bandage against Dante's arm. He flinched, his jaw locking tight, but he didn't pull away. "Why are they still chasing us?" Lila asked, pressing harder as the van swerved through traffic. "We got away. Why doesn't he just give up?" Dante looked at her. His eyes were dark, filled with a grim, exhausted reality. "Kovach cannot give up. Lila, you know too much, and now I have declared war. This does not end until one of us is in the ground. We can go to the FBI," Lila insisted. "We can drive straight to the federal building." Dante laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. He winced as the movement pulled at his wound. "Do you think Kovach operates this openly without friends? He has judges in his pocket. He has police captains on his payroll. There are senators who dine at his table. If we walk into a police station tonight, we will never walk out." Lila stared at him, the hopelessness of it settling over her like a heavy blanket. "So there is no way out." "There is one way," Dante said, his gaze shifting to the window, watching the city blur past. "We burn the whole network down. We expose them all, not just Kovach, but the men in suits who protect him. We make the truth so loud that they cannot kill us to silence it." The safe house was a relic of a bygone era, an abandoned auto repair shop on the edge of the industrial district. The windows were painted over with grease and grime, and the sign above the door was missing half its letters. Luca drove the van straight into the main bay, and the heavy roller door clattered shut behind them, sealing them in. The air inside smelled of oil, old rubber and dust. It was cold, but it was safe. "Secure the perimeter," Dante ordered, his voice weaker now. "Marco, set up the network in the office. Lila, help me to the back." They went into a small storage room that had been converted into a makeshift break room. A heavy workbench sat in the middle, cluttered with tools. Dante leaned against it, his breathing shallow. "Sit," Lila said, guiding him onto the bench. "Let me see it." Dante obeyed, his movements stiff. He hissed in pain as he peeled the blood-soaked shirt off his shoulder, letting it drop to the floor. Lila's breath hitched. His torso was a map of violence, old scars, faded knife wounds, the jagged line of a bullet graze on his ribs from years ago. But her focus snapped to the fresh wound on his bicep. It was ugly. A deep furrow plowed through the muscle, bleeding sluggishly. "It missed the bone," Dante murmured, examining it with a detached clinical eye. Just flesh, Lila repeated incredulously. She found a first aid kit on a shelf, dusty on the outside but stocked with sterile supplies. She poured antiseptic onto a piece of gauze. "This is going to burn. Do it." She pressed the gauze to the wound. Dante's entire body went rigid. His hand gripped the edge of the workbench so hard the wood creaked. He didn't make a sound, but his head dropped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. Lila worked quickly, cleaning the blood away, her hands gentle but firm. "You were reckless," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You jumped in front of me. You took a bullet." "Better me than you," Dante grunted, not lifting his head. "Why?" Lila asked. Tears pricked her eyes, blurring her vision as she began to wrap a fresh bandage around his arm. "Why do you care so much? You run a crime syndicate. Dante, you're supposed to be the villain, but you risk your life to save strangers. You pay for clinics. You hate the trafficking." Dante looked up. His eyes were weary, stripped of all defenses. The adrenaline had washed away the mask, leaving only the man beneath. "Because I know what it is like to be powerless," he said softly. "My father was a weak man. He let people walk over us. He let people hurt us. When I took over, I made a promise." He winced as she tightened the bandage, then continued. "I promised that in my territory, the wolves would not eat the sheep. I do illegal things. Lila, I smuggle. I gamble. I lend money, but I do not sell people. I do not destroy lives for profit. Men like Kovac, they are a disease. I have spent 10 years quietly cutting his lines, burning his shipments, trying to keep him out of my city." Lila finished tying the knot on the bandage. Her hands lingered on his arm. She looked at the scars on his chest, realizing that every mark was a testament to a war he had been fighting alone. "You are not a villain," she whispered. She traced the line of an old scar over his heart with her fingertips. Dante's breath hitched. He looked at her. His dark eyes dilated. The air in the small, grimy room suddenly became thick, charged with an electricity that made the hair on Lila's arm stand up. "Lila," he warned, his voice a low rumble. "Be careful." "I am tired of being careful," she said. She stepped between his knees, closing the distance. She placed her hands on his bare shoulders, feeling the heat of his skin, the tension in the hard muscles. She looked up into his face, seeing the conflict, the desire, and the terrifying vulnerability he only showed her. She leaned in and kissed him. This time, there was no hesitation. It wasn't frantic like the kiss in the hallway during the storm. It was deliberate. It was a claim. Dante made a sound low in his throat, a groan of surrender. He reached up, his good hand cupping the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair. His other arm, the injured one, settled respectfully at her waist, pulling her closer without force. He kissed her with a restrained intensity that stole her breath. His lips were warm, demanding but giving. He tasted of survival. Lila pressed closer, molding her body against his, needing to feel the solid reality of him. Dante broke the kiss for a second, resting his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. He searched her eyes, his gaze darting between her pupils, looking for any sign of fear or regret. "Are you sure?" he whispered roughly. "I'm a damaged man. Lila, I have blood on my hands. If you stay with me, there is no going back." "I don't want to go back," Lila said, her voice steady. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips swollen. "I tried to run away today, and it felt like dying. I am choosing this. I am choosing you." Dante closed his eyes for a moment as if her words were a physical relief. "I have wanted you since the moment you looked at me in that alley," he admitted, his voice raw. "I hated myself for it. I thought I was dragging you into hell." "Maybe you were," Lila said softly, brushing her thumb over his cheekbone. but you are the only one who keeps the fire away from me." He pulled her back into a kiss, deeper this time, filled with a desperate, consuming hunger. For a few minutes, in the back room of a dirty auto shop, surrounded by enemies, they belonged only to each other. "Boss, we have a problem." Marco's voice from the main base shattered the moment. Dante pulled back, his chest heaving. He rested his forehead against Lila's one last time, a silent apology, before the mask slipped back into place. He stood up, grabbing a fresh shirt from a pile of clothes Luca had scavenged. "Coming!" Dante called out. They walked out into the main office. Marco was hunched over a battered laptop, wires running across the desk to a portable satellite modem. "I cracked the encryption on the cloud drive," Marco said, typing furiously. "Miss Carter, you are not kidding about this file size." Lila moved around the desk to look at the screen. "That is the project," she said, pointing to a folder labeled logistics_branding_final. "I thought it was just graphic assets, high-resolution images." "It is images." "All right," Marco said grimly. "Scans, thousands of them." He clicked a file. An image filled the screen. It wasn't a logo. It was a scanned page of a ledger, names, dates, bank account numbers, and shipping manifest codes. "Holy Mother of God," Luca whispered, leaning in. "This is it," Dante said, his eyes scanning the columns. "This is the Paymaster's book. Look here." He pointed to a recurring entry. Senator Vane. And here, Captain O'Malley. "It ties them all together," Marco said. "Kovacs' trafficking network, the money laundering, the bribes to the Port Authority. It is all here." Lila felt the blood drain from her face. "I have been carrying this around for 3 months?" "You are not just a witness anymore," Dante said, looking at her with a mix of awe and terror. "You are the bomb that destroys the castle." "What do we do?" Lila asked. Dante straightened up, wincing slightly as his shoulder pulled. "We detonate it. All of it. If we leak this," Luca warned, "the fallout will be massive. The feds will come down on everyone, including us. This ledger has transactions that link back to our shell companies, too, boss. The ones we used to wash the money for the clinic." "I know," Dante said quietly. He looked at Lila. He looked at the woman who had bandaged his arm and kissed his scars. "I am prepared to burn my own house down," Dante said, his voice steady. "If it stops Kovacs, if it keeps her alive, we release it." He turned to Marco. "We need a clean channel. We're not sending this to the general tip line. It will get buried. We need Agent Harris." "Harris?" Luca asked. "The Fed?" "He's been trying to put you in jail for 5 years. "Exactly," Dante said. "Which means he is the only one we know isn't working for Kovacs. He's honest. He hates me, but he is honest." Dante outlined the plan. He would meet Agent Harris in person to hand over the physical drive, a decoy maneuver to draw Kovacs' eyes. Meanwhile, Marco, Luca, and Lila would remain at the safe house, coordinating a massive, simultaneous upload to every major news outlet and federal watchdog agency in the country. "There is still a mole," Dante reminded them, his expression darkening. "Someone told Kovacs we were at the lake house. We've not found him yet. This operation will flush him out. When the data starts moving, whoever it is will panic." Night had fallen completely over the city. The safe house was quiet, save for the hum of the servers Marco was prepping. Lila climbed the rusted metal stairs to the flat roof of the auto shop. The wind was cold, smelling of rain and exhaust fumes. She walked to the edge, looking out at the glittering skyline of Brookhaven. It looked so peaceful from a distance. She heard the door open behind her. Dante. He walked over and draped his heavy leather jacket over her shoulders. The warmth of his body still clung to the lining. He stood beside her, looking out at the same view. "You should be resting," Lila said softly, pulling the jacket tighter. "I will sleep when you are safe." Dante replied. He hesitated, then tentatively put his good arm around her shoulders. Lila leaned into him immediately, resting her head against his chest. They stood there in silence for a long time, watching the blinking red lights of the radio towers. "What happens after tomorrow?" Lila asked. "If we survive," Dante said, staring at the horizon. My life as I know it is over. The organization will crumble. I will likely go to prison, or into witness protection if Harris makes a deal. You would do that? Lila looked up at him. You would give up everything? I was born into this life. Lila, Dante said. I didn't choose it. My father chose it. My uncle chose it. Today is the first time I feel like I am making a choice for myself. He looked down at her, his eyes reflecting the city lights. And you? What will you do? I don't know, Lila admitted. I can't go back to the bar. I can't go back to being afraid of shadows. You could start over, Dante said. Somewhere new. Somewhere with no rain. Maybe, Lila said. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. But I don't want to go alone. Dante squeezed her hand. The gesture was fierce, possessive, and desperate. Then we go together. Whatever happens tomorrow. We face it standing up. He turned his body toward her, pressing his forehead against hers. The wind whipped around them, but in the circle of his arms, Lila felt an unnatural calm. They were two people standing on the edge of a cliff, preparing to jump. And for the first time in her life, Lila wasn't afraid of the fall. She was only afraid of letting go of his hand. Tomorrow, Dante whispered, like a vow. Tomorrow, she echoed. Below them, the city slept, unaware that in a few hours the truth would tear it apart. The dawn over the industrial district was not gold. It was the color of bruised iron. The light filtered through the dirty, clear-story windows of the auto shop, casting long, skeletal shadows across the concrete floor. Dante stood by the heavy steel door, checking the magazine of his pistol one last time. He moved with a mechanical precision that Lila now recognized as a shield against terror. He was about to walk into a lion's den to buy her a future. It is time, Marco said from the driver's seat of the sedan idling in the bay. Dante nodded. He turned to Lila. She was standing by the workbench, her arms wrapped around herself, wearing a sweater that was 3 sizes too big for her. She looked small, but her eyes were fierce. Dante crossed the space between them in 2 long strides. He didn't speak immediately. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones. His touch was warm, rough, and agonizingly tender. Stay with Luca, he commanded softly. Keep the upload running. If the line goes dead, if I don't call in 30 minutes, you wipe the drives and you run. You do not look for me. Don't say that, Lila whispered, gripping his wrists. You stick to the plan. You hand off the drive, and you come back. I will do everything in my power to come back, Dante said. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of desperation, but of memory, slow, firm, and searing. He was memorizing the taste of her, the feel of her breath against his lips, just in case this was the last thing he ever felt. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright with unshed emotion. Be brave. Lila, come back to me, she said, her voice cracking. Dante gave her a single, sharp nod, then turned and walked out the door. The engine revved. Tires crunched on gravel, and then he was gone. The silence in the shop was suffocating. Lila sat at the makeshift desk, watching the progress bar on the laptop screen. It was crawling, 30%. Relax, kid, Luca said from his perch near the door. He was cleaning his weapon, but his eyes kept darting to the security monitors. Boss knows what he is doing. Harris is a straight shooter. If he says he will take the evidence, he will take it. It's not Harris I'm worried about, Lila murmured. She checked the burner phone on the desk. 5 minutes had passed. No text. 40%, Marco's voice crackled over the radio from the car, confirming they were en route. Lila typed in a command to mirror the upload to a secondary server in Europe, just as Dante had taught her. Suddenly, the screen flashed red. Unauthorized access detected. Luca, Lila said, her voice rising. Someone is trying to remote into the system. They are trying to kill the connection. Luca dropped his rag and moved to the desk. Trace it. Is it the feds? Lila's fingers flew across the keyboard. No, the IP is local. It is coming from a mobile device. She narrowed her eyes at the code scrolling down the terminal. It is coming from inside the network. It's an encrypted admin key. The color drained from Luca's face. Only lieutenants have admin keys." Before he could finish the sentence, the service door behind them creaked open. Lila spun around in her chair. Luca reached for his gun, but he was too slow. Rocco stood in the doorway. He was one of the men Lila had seen at the lake house, a man Dante had trusted with his life for 10 years. He held a silenced pistol leveled directly at Luca's chest. "Step away from the computer," Rocco said. His voice was casual, almost bored. "Rocco?" Luca asked, his hands hovering near his waist. "What are you doing? Put the piece away." "I said step away," Rocco repeated. "Cancel the upload, Luca, or I put a bullet in you and the girl does it for me." "You are the mole," Lila whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "You told Kovac where we were," Rocco sneered, his lip curling. "I told Kovac that Dante had lost his mind, turning down millions in trafficking revenue because of some misplaced morality. It is weak. Business is business. If Dante won't take the money, someone else will." "He is your brother," Luca spat. "He's a relic," Rocco countered. "He is soft. And now he is going to drag us all down with him because he fell in love with a stray cat." He gestured with the gun. "Kill the upload. Lila, now." "No," Lila said, standing up. Her legs shook, but she stood her ground. "I will shoot him," Rocco warned, aiming at Luca. "Do it," Luca roared, launching himself forward. The gun foot-footed twice. Luca jerked back, hit in the shoulder, spinning to the floor. "No!" Lila screamed. Rocco turned the gun on her. "Stupid girl. You are ruining everything. I was going to make this quick." He stepped toward the desk, reaching for the laptop to smash it. Lila didn't think. She reacted. Her hand closed around the heavy metal industrial stapler sitting on the desk. As Rocco reached out, she hurled it with every ounce of terrified strength she possessed. The heavy iron struck Rocco's knuckles with a sickening crunch. He howled, the gun clattering from his numb fingers and skittering across the oil-stained floor. "You little witch!" Rocco snarled, clutching his hand. Lila didn't wait. She dove for the laptop, shielding it with her body. Rocco kicked out, his boot connecting with her ribs. Pain exploded in her side, stealing her breath, but she curled tighter around the machine. "You are dead!" Rocco shouted, looking around for his weapon. "Stay low. Use distraction." Dante's voice echoed in her mind. Lila saw a heavy monkey wrench on the floor near the leg of the desk. She grabbed it. As Rocco lunged for her, she swung the wrench upward in a vicious arc. It connected with his kneecap. Rocco screamed, his leg buckling. He went down to one knee. Lila scrambled backward, crawling on her hands and knees toward where Luca had fallen. His gun was lying 2 feet away. She grabbed it. It was heavy, cold, and terrified her. She raised it with both hands, shaking violently. Rocco was getting up, his face twisted in a mask of pure murder. He saw the gun in her hands and laughed, a wet, breathless sound. "You don't have the guts," he taunted, limping toward her. Lila squeezed her eyes shut for a microsecond, seeing Dante's face. Keep her alive. She opened her eyes, aimed at Rocco's good leg, and pulled the trigger. The boom was deafening in the small space. Rocco yelped, stumbling back as the bullet grazed his thigh. He didn't fall, but he hesitated. 3 miles away, in the shadowy depths of a concrete parking garage, Dante Moretti was running for his life. "Go! Go!" he shouted, shoving Agent Harris behind a concrete pillar. Bullets chipped chunks of cement from the column inches from Dante's head. He had walked into the meeting with the drive in his hand, only to spot the glint of a scope on the adjacent rooftop a second before the first shot was fired. It was a setup. Not by Harris, the federal agent looked as terrified and confused as Dante, but by the mole. "They know we are here!" Harris yelled over the gunfire. "We are pinned down. Take it!" Dante jammed the hard drive into Harris's chest. "That is the evidence. The ledger, the bank accounts, the politicians. It is all there. I can't take this if we are dead. Moretti." "Then run," Dante snapped. He leaned out and fired 3 suppressing shots toward the ramp where Kovac's gunmen were advancing. "I will draw their fire. Get to your car and don't look back." Dante didn't wait for an answer. He broke cover, sprinting toward the far exit. As predicted, the gunfire followed him. He ducked behind a parked sedan, glass shattering above his head. He saw a gunman flanking him on the left. Dante moved with lethal efficiency, rolling over the hood of the car and firing twice. The man dropped. Dante reached the stairwell door. Kicking it open, he took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting out onto the street level. A black sedan, one of Kovacs, was idling at the curb, the driver waiting for the kill team to return. Dante didn't hesitate. He ripped the door open, hauled the driver out by his collar, and slammed his head against the doorframe. He threw the unconscious man aside and jumped into the driver's seat. He peeled out into traffic, his heart hammering not from the fight, but from the silence on his phone. He dialed Lila. Static. "Answer me," he growled, swerving around a bus. "Lila, answer the phone." Nothing but white noise. "Rocco," Dante muttered, the realization hitting him with the force of a collision. It was the only explanation. The rooftop snipers knew exactly where to look. The admin key. He slammed his foot on the accelerator. Back at the auto shop. The standoff was breaking. Rocco, bleeding and enraged, had realized Lila wasn't going to kill him. He lunged at her, knocking the gun from her hand with a backhanded slap that sent her sprawling. He stood over her, breathing hard, his eyes wild. He pulled a knife from his belt. "Enough games," Rocco rasped. "I am going to cut you, and then I am going to watch the life bleed out of you while I delete that file." Lila kicked out at him, scrambling backward across the floor, her back hitting the tire rack. There was nowhere left to go. "Dante isn't coming," Rocco sneered, raising the knife. "He's dead in a parking garage." The metal roller door of the main bay exploded inward. It wasn't opened. It was obliterated. The black sedan Dante had stolen smashed through the corrugated steel with a screech of tearing metal and shattering glass. The car skidded sideways, slamming into the lift and knocking over a stack of oil drums. Rocco flinched, shielding his eyes from the debris. That split second was all Lila needed. She rolled to the side, ducking behind the tire rack. The driver's door of the ruined car flew open. Dante fell out, stumbling. Then, finding his footing, he saw Rocco. He saw the knife. He saw Lila on the floor. A sound tore from Dante's throat, a roar of pure, animalistic fury. He didn't draw a weapon, he charged. Rocco turned just in time to be hit by a freight train. Dante tackled him, driving his shoulder into Rocco's chest. They crashed onto the oily concrete, limbs tangling, fists flying. It was a brawl of brothers turned enemies. Rocco slashed with the knife, cutting a line across Dante's forearm, but Dante didn't even flinch. He grabbed Rocco's wrist and slammed it against the floor again and again until the knife clattered away. "You sold us out," Dante roared, landing a brutal punch to Rocco's jaw. "You sold her." "I tried to save the business," Rocco shouted back, spitting blood. "Nah." He bucked his hips, throwing Dante off him. "You are weak, Dante. You let a woman make you soft." "She made me human," Dante snarled. He scrambled to his feet, but Rocco was faster. Rocco dove for the gun Lila had dropped, Luca's gun. "Dante!" Lila screamed from the shadows. Rocco grabbed the pistol and rolled onto his back, aiming at Dante's chest. "Goodbye, boss," Rocco hissed. Lila grabbed a heavy brake rotor from the shelf beside her and threw it. It didn't hit Rocco, but it crashed into a metal toolbox next to his head with a deafening clang. Rocco flinched, his aim wavering for a fraction of a second. Dante lunged. He grabbed the barrel of the gun. Twisting it aside, the weapon went off with a roar. Dante hissed, a line of red appearing on his side, but he didn't let go. He forced the gun down, his weight pressing onto Rocco's chest. They struggled over the weapon, fingers fighting for the trigger guard. "Let go!" Dante shouted. "Never!" Rocco screamed. The gun went off again, a muffled thump against the concrete. Rocco's eyes went wide. His grip on the gun loosened. He let out a long, rattling exhale, and then his head fell back against the floor, staring unseeing at the ceiling. Dante knelt there for a moment, his chest heaving, his hand still gripping the gun on top of his dead friend's chest. Silence rushed back into the room, heavy and absolute. Then, from the laptop on the desk, a cheerful chime sounded, upload complete, and in the distance, the wail of sirens began to rise, approaching from every direction. "Dante!" Lila was beside him. She dropped to her knees, her hands hovering over him, terrified to touch him. He was covered in oil, blood, and glass. "Are you okay?" she sobbed. "Tell me you are okay." Dante let go of the gun. He sat back on his heels, looking at her. He touched the graze on his side, then looked at his hand. "I am alive," he whispered, sounding surprised. "You are bleeding!" Lila cried, tearing at her own sleeve to find cloth. I need to. "Lila," Dante said. He caught her frantic hands. "Stop. Look at me." She looked. His face was battered, his lips split, but his eyes were clear. "You're getting good at patching me up," he joked weakly. Lila broke. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "I thought you were dead. I thought he was going to kill you. I thought you were the monster. Dante. When we met, I thought you were my nightmare." "I was," Dante murmured, holding her tight, his hand stroking her hair. "No." She wept. "You are the only one who ever fought for me. You are the only one who kept me alive. You made me want to live," Dante said, his voice thick with emotion. "I would rather lose the Empire. I would rather lose everything than lose you. Federal agents, drop your weapons." The shout came from the ruined bay door. Agent Harris stood there, flanked by a SWAT team, rifles trained on them. Dante slowly raised his hands. Lila stayed clung to his side, refusing to move. "It is over. Moretti," Harris called out, stepping through the wreckage. He looked at Rocco's body, then at the laptop, and finally at Dante. We got the files. The data is already circulating. Half the city government is going to be in handcuffs by noon. Then you have what you want," Dante said calmly. Harris lowered his weapon slightly. "You helped us. Moretti. That counts for something. But I can't let you walk away. You know that." "I know." Harris sighed. "Here is the deal. You testify. You tell us everything about the network, the routes, the partners we missed. You do that, and you go into the program. New name, new life. But Dante Moretti dies in this room. You give up the money, the power, all of it." Harris turned his gaze to Lila. "And you, Miss Carter, you are a victim in this. We can set you up anywhere you want. You can walk away from him right now. Start over, clean slate." The room was silent. The sirens outside were deafening now. Dante looked at Lila. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He just waited, giving her the choice he had promised her from the beginning. Lila looked at Harris. Then she looked at the man kneeling in the oil and blood, the man who had stitched up his friends, who had counted seconds in the dark for her, who had burned his kingdom to ashes just to keep her safe. "No," Lila said. She reached down and took Dante's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I am testifying too," she told Harris, her voice ringing clear and strong. "And wherever he goes, I go." Dante let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a lifetime. His composure cracked, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. He pulled her into a fierce, desperate embrace, burying his face in her neck, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. "Together," he whispered against her skin. "Together," she promised. 6 months later, the ocean air smelled different than the rain in Brookhaven. It smelled of salt and cedar and freedom. The small coastal town was quiet, the kind of place where people didn't ask questions about scars or pasts. In a small garage near the pier, a man named Daniel slid out from under a vintage truck, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He wore blue coveralls and looked 5 years younger than he had in a penthouse suit. His phone buzzed. A text message. "Dinner is ready. Bring wine." He smiled. A genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. He walked up the external stairs to the apartment above the shop. Inside, it was modest, warm light, secondhand furniture, sketches and design proofs scattered on the coffee table. Lila was on the balcony, looking out at the sunset over the water. She wore a simple white dress, her hair loose in the wind. She looked healthy. She looked unafraid. Daniel, Dante, stepped out onto the balcony behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his cheek pressing against hers. Lila leaned into him, covering his hands with her own. She traced the faint white line of the scar on his forearm with her thumb. "What are you thinking about?" Dante asked softly, his voice a low rumble against her back. "The night we met," Lila admitted, looking at the orange and purple horizon. "I was so sure you were dragging me into hell." Dante kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear. "I thought I was, too." Lila turned in his arms, facing him. She looked up into the dark eyes that once terrified her, now seeing only the warmth of the man who loved her. "You didn't drag me to hell," she whispered. "You pulled me out of it." "We walked out together," Dante corrected. He cupped her face, his hands rough and warm. He lowered his head, and their lips met. It was a soft, lingering kiss, devoid of desperation, filled only with gratitude and a quiet, unshakable certainty. They had lost everything to find this. And as the sun dipped below the water, casting them in gold, Lila knew that salvation didn't always look like a hero in a uniform. Sometimes it looked like the man everyone else called a monster, who chose, again and again, to keep her alive, even when it cost him everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the darkness and back into the light with Lila and Dante. I hope you enjoyed She Thought He Was Her Captor. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Please leave a comment down below and tell me which country you call home. And if you enjoyed this emotional ride, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Share your thoughts on the ending in the comments. Did Dante redeem himself in your eyes? I can't wait to read what you think. Until next time.